microphone up close, webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
See, but I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? Pistols, frontal slap of choice, I don't know, computers, internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from, as long as it's real. It's hard to get real these days, because seriously, they don't want you to just read these two sources whenever I try to prove out. It's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappointed in another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty old man.
Really? You can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? More Hooker, eruptions, whatever. Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2. Within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America, we bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original. We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years.
That's that.
And here we are, live once again. It's Saturday night. It's time for the Ochelli Effect. Oh boy. Anyway, God, that intro is always so noisy in my headphones. But hey, that's the way it is. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you an interesting special guest, a guy who I have a great deal of respect for, who has done an amazing amount of work as far as the alternative media is concerned, as far as any media is concerned. A gentleman who is the founder and main publisher on a website called CorbettReport.com, and has always, as far as I know, broadcast from an area that he describes always as the sunny climes of Japan. A gentleman who has done an amazing volume of work that a friend of a friend in the alternative media, James Evan Pilato, likes to refer to as the hardest working man in alternative media. So I bring you tonight Mr. James Corbett. How you doing, James?
Well, I'm doing excellent, and it's really great to be here on the Ochelli Effect. Congratulations on your new program.
Thanks, James. I appreciate that. I'll tell you, I appeared as a guest on your show a couple of times, and had a really good time. We were talking Lee Harvey Oswald at that point. As everybody knows, JFK and JFK research has been one of my major focuses over time. Of course, I've branched out into a lot of other areas, and been through a whole bunch of stuff. But I'll tell you, I think your site started in about 2007 or somewhere in that area, right?
Yes, it was June 2007.
June of 2007. Wow. I'll tell you, and believe me when I say the volume of stuff on this guy's site, if you're not familiar with it, you need to get familiar with it. The podcasts, the videos, the mini documentaries, the video series, it's just a plethora of information and really great stuff, not only on historical and suppressed historical information, but current events as they unfold. Even this week, you were discussing on New World Next Week, which is the show you do with your friend from Media Monarchy there, about the missing plane and all of these other things, which, of course, I'm starting to believe is nothing more than just a major weapon of mass distraction. But either way, it is quite the fascinating mystery, and you guys were covering that stuff. And you cover just about everything there is to cover. I'll tell you, my favorite of all of the podcasts and things, because I've carried a lot of your stuff in my iPods, on my computers, and so on and so forth, and used a lot of your stuff to begin my exploration into various topics, but also to look into the more recent developments of various things that have gone on in the world. I've got to say that my favorite one was something called Patriot Mythology, which you did more than one part on, which was about these misnomers and misunderstandings of sorts in the information stream that is alternative media. And that was really a great episode where you covered one of the things that I found myself harping on for many years and seemed to not be able to get people to listen to, which was the idea about JFK and the executive order and exactly what the meaning of that was.
That's right. I mean, this is an interesting thing because I'm sure anyone who's studied JFK for any length of time has come across this argument, and I believe that this originates from Crossfire by Jim Marrs. At least that's the earliest formulation of this that I've found. But if, for people who don't know, basically Executive Order 11110 is allegedly, according to certain theorists out there, is an order that was signed off on by JFK, a presidential executive order that supposedly was going to end the tyranny of the Federal Reserve and start issuing debt-free silver-backed money directly from the Treasury, or so that's what people were led to believe. But in fact, as I go through on that episode, with a breakdown from G. Edward Griffin, who is pretty much the authority on the Federal Reserve and wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island, probably the all-time best-selling book about the Federal Reserve and where it really came from. He goes through and breaks down how that is in fact not true. If you actually go read through this executive order, that in fact this is what it was doing was transferring power to the Treasury Secretary to be able to eventually stop the issue of silver-backed money that was taking place on a regular basis at the time, so that even after JFK was assassinated, there was an issue of silverback dollars that finally ended, I believe, in the mid 1960s. But yes, this was supposedly the Federal Reserve was killing JFK because of this, and that's it's an idea that's caught on quite a bit, and I still see it popping up pretty much every time the JFK conspiracy is raised. I still see that popping up in various online forums. So I did my part to try to draw people's attention to the fact that this was in fact a spurious idea, and I'm glad that yourself and others are still trying to get people to look at the truth about this, because it's one of those myths that apparently just won't die.
Yeah, and spurious is an excellent term, excellent description of what that claim is. Not only was it something that continued on a little bit after JFK's assassination, but when put into its correct context, you see that based on the change in the Silver Purchase Act, that this in its proper context really was that transfer of power. But not only that, I proved in a video that I did, because people had claimed that only JFK did this and the only other guy to do this was Abraham Lincoln. I showed people that previous presidential decrees had come down before, because this was something that was a privilege of the executive branch to do so, and that these U.S. notes had actually been in print at least since the 1920s, as far back as I could track, and that was with physically producing the notes and everything else and examining which Treasury secretaries had actually signed off on this stuff prior to, and which presidents had continued the practice of doing so. So sometimes when we look at these things, it's definitely worth a deeper look and a more critical evaluation of some of these sort of startling statements that come out. But the fact is also that if one does look a bit deeper, you can find that Kennedy was involved in battling the Federal Reserve. However, it wasn't through this particular device. There were things going on that still have yet to fully surface, and you can sort of find that out by looking up a man named James Saxon and looking at the reports that came out surrounding the sort of internal infighting that Kennedy was doing with that particular agency. Anyway, aside from that, though, I've got to say that you have produced tons and tons of stuff, and I know you're working on a documentary about the Federal Reserve. And in general, I mean, what would you like to discuss about that tonight?
Well, I mean, we can discuss any aspects of what I'm working on that you'd like, but as you mentioned, I am working on this Federal Reserve documentary, and it's somewhat funny, I suppose, for the listeners by now, regular listeners to my report, because I have now been promising this documentary for about 3 going on 4 months, and this was originally supposed to be done by the end of December, so it's definitely taking a lot longer than originally thought. But basically what this has become is a feature-length documentary. It's not going to be a short kind of podcast-like documentary that I was originally planning on. It's a feature-length documentary that goes into the history of the creation of the Federal Reserve, kind of the backstory that occurred in the late 18th and early 19th century to make this possible. And then, of course, the panic of 1907 that really set the gears in motion for the founding of the Federal Reserve after the National Monetary Commission did its work. And I think that story about the history of how the Federal Reserve came to be is extremely interesting, extremely exciting if you know what you're looking at and what the stakes involved were and what ended up transpiring because of the creation of the Federal Reserve. I mean, it's actually a really interesting story that, of course, you never get taught in school because they've somehow managed to eliminate any sort of knowledge or education about the monetary system or how money is created. These very basic questions that everyone has these questions. Everyone wants to know about these things, but they've somehow eliminated this from the education system. So I think it's definitely worth people's time to take the time to find out about this history. And I really do think it's exciting and interesting. So to the extent that I'm able to convey that in this documentary, that will be to my credit. To the extent that I'm not, it will simply just be my own failing, not the lack of interest in the subject itself. But it's going to be divided into 3 parts, with the first part being that history of the creation of the Federal Reserve, the second part being how the Federal Reserve functions, how it creates money, and what the system is about. And then the third part will be basically solutions. If and when we are able to get ourselves off of the Federal Reserve System, what can we replace it with? And of course, there are lots of competing ideas for that. And I'm not going to offer just one idea that I think is the total solution. I'm going to put a lot of different ideas out there and let viewers come to their own conclusions. But that's basically the structure that I'll be following. So hopefully in the next week or 2, that documentary is going to be available to the public, and it'll, of course, like all my other work, be freely available on my website at corbettreport.com.
Right, and I've got to say that, one of the most profound sort of illustrations of how the Federal Reserve functioned, and I'm sure you saw it as well, was in the Zeitgeist series, where they had pretty much broken it down and explained, money creation and the extremely important idea that this is probably one of the most misunderstood and yet completely based on faith sort of practices and mechanisms that it has a profound effect, again, sorry to use that word again, but a profound effect on the lives and the overall function of the entire planet. And yet it is still completely misunderstood by probably, 90% of the population, I would say.
Not only that, but I think even in the alternative media, there isn't a very good grasp of the Federal Reserve and how it actually works. I mean, I think there's some general ideas about the Federal Reserve that float around out there, but I don't think people have a really firm footing on what it is or how it functions. And I think, again, probably the most important thing that people need to understand is that the Federal Reserve isn't a bank per se. It's a system that has been instituted that is overseen by a board of governors. And then there's the Federal Open Market Committee. And then there are the reserve banks, the regional reserve banks. And it's important to know that the real power lies in the reserve banks and who, more importantly, is sitting on the boards of those reserve banks. And specifically the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is really the crown jewel of the system, so that the other parts of that system can be more or less distractionary towards the real issue and where the real power lies. And again, it's not necessarily that the money comes from the Federal Reserve itself. It's not like banks are making money from the Federal Reserve directly. It's just the power that it comes with the issuance of the money and of course the creation of money out of nothing that is the real key to the system. So hopefully I can put that in a way that people will understand, although it's exceptionally complex. So it's very difficult to break it down into very easy to understand parts, but hopefully I can go some way of the way towards doing that.
Well, right, and that's why I kind of gave a tip of the hat to the Zeitgeist movie, because at the very least it was a very brief and fairly accurate, depiction of the system by which this stuff is created. Fractional reserve banking and the methodology behind it was illustrated pretty well in that movie. And I thought that was an interesting tool for being able to at least introduce to people the idea of the amount of power that is actually invested in this system that is really not understood in general. And in addition, the concept and the whole, I know I've heard it many, many times, but the Federal Reserve is not a federal agency. It's not something that we ostensibly have any control over, although, as time goes on, we seem to have no control as people over any of these agencies or governmental entities that are supposed to be our tools and our institutions. They are not ours. But even in the case of the Federal Reserve, you're dealing with something that's even less ours, even less something that belongs to the American people per se. So where that power resides, I think, is, again, of great importance, because the individuals who are involved in that system, their methodologies, their, motives, for lack of a better word, are of the utmost importance, I think, to us as people in the end, as part of the end result of what occurs based on what they do.
Exactly right. And again, we don't have to go out on a limb to talk about that fact that you just cited, that the Federal Reserve is actually not really an agency of government. It defines itself as independent, whatever that means. But that comes directly from Alan Greenspan, of course, the former Federal Reserve chair, who was being interviewed by Jim Lehrer back in 2007 about a book that he had just written at the time, in which he said, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. So long as that is in place and there is no evidence that the administration of the Congress or anybody else is requesting that we do things other than what we think is the appropriate thing, then what the relationships are between the Federal Reserve and the president don't frankly matter. So that's just one example of that. And they do define it more verbosely on their website, where they put a lot of work into trying to make it sound like it is the government, but it's not a part of the government. It has governmental authority, but it's not under any governmental authority, et cetera, et cetera. It's very interesting the way they try to, worm that language so that it sounds quite much like it is part of the federal government, and yet it is not. And they try to have their cake and eat it too. And they've really been quite successful in that, I guess, over the past 100 years, because still a lot of people really do think of it as a governmental agency. And then I think there's the problem of the opposite viewpoint, in which people think of it as so it's become common, for example, in the alternative media to say, well, it's neither federal nor does it have reserve. And the implication is that it's not a part of the government. It's a private bank, which is, to a certain extent it's true, depending how you look at it. But I think it's important to understand that, well, it really does have the imprimatur of the federal government, regardless of whether or not it is really a part of that government. And because of that, it has been established by an act of Congress. It can be abolished by an act of Congress as well. And obviously that's a lot easier said than done. There would be a lot of, I think unbelievable political wrangling to get something like that done. But it's important to know that actually is the case, that it has been established by government, so it can actually be dismantled by government as well. And I think we should understand that, because there's sort of a general idea that this is somehow some vague thing that exists in some netherworld that can't be affected by human beings. That's not true. And again, I think the invincibility of the Federal Reserve is part of its own mythology, and I don't think we should buy into it, because it does make of the banksters that own this monstrosity into more than what they really are. And we have to understand that, again, it's just mere mortals that we're grappling with here, and the Federal Reserve didn't always exist, and we can imagine a time in which it will not exist.
And this is a very important point, I think, in any of these discussions about things that are, considered somewhat alternative, but I think are more relative than the commercialized and government controlled media. Sometimes when we lend power by mythology, in a sense, we grant things a boogeyman status as opposed to actually dealing with them in a real world fashion. I mean, Ron Paul, one of the guys who was famously known for attempting to get an audit of the Fed in place, there was a real purpose behind that. It wasn't as though it would have been without any sort of purpose to achieve such a goal. These kinds of things are not irrelevant because the boogeyman is too large. And I think that is definitely one of the things that we have to, as members of the alternative media, as citizen journalists, we need to be very careful to make sure that although we are dealing with a nefarious organization in some ways, that it is not supernatural and beyond the grasp of all men. It may be a complex issue and something that has to be battled in a particular way and by particular mechanisms. And it wasn't established overnight, so we cannot remove it overnight. But there are ways to contend with it at the very least and to change the system that is in place if we take the proper road. Now, it's hard to know that proper road when there are no lights on the paths. But that's the thing that we're trying to do here, is to put out some of those lights on these darker pathways, I think, to give people an idea of what road someone may be able to travel in order to contend with these things. Don't you agree?
Well, I think that's a good analogy. That is a good way of looking at it. And of course, this extends past the Federal Reserve example to lots of other things that I cover on my show. I think it's the same thing. Again, this is not some, is immortal, beings from another planet that are doing this. It's just human beings that are conspiring to do this. And yes, they do have an incredible amount of power and are able to pull off things like the assassination of the president in broad daylight and get away with it. And so, I mean, we have to be realistic about what we're facing, but at the same time, we have to understand that these people do make mistakes, they do slip up, and they are vulnerable in various ways. So I think it is important to understand that. And yes, I mean, I think the analogy of kind of blazing new paths is a good one because, again, I think what that relies on is the idea that we have a map of reality presented to us through our, for example, public school indoctrination, through the media that we consume, through all of the authorities that issue their decrees. We've been handed this map of reality that roughly corresponds to the path that has been well trodden by many, many generations now of the established system. But and that's basically what keeps us on that path, is because, well, we have this map of the terrain. We understand what things look like, when we just go along to get along and act within the established, colored boundaries of the system. But once we step outside of those boundaries, well, it's a very scary world. We don't know exactly where we are. We don't know exactly where we're going. We don't know the best way to get there. We're probably going to make mistakes along the way. It's not going to be easy. So that's the fundamental psychology of why most people through most of their lives will never question this type of thing. And I'm sure you've encountered that quite a bit through your own research of JFK, that there are a lot of people who just don't want to look at the facts, that probably deep down do have their own suspicions about it. But in the end of the day, they don't want to trouble their own lives to really put their minds where their mouths are and actually start looking into this for themselves. So it's definitely an uphill battle for people who do want to blaze that trail. But I think probably the most empowering thing that I can say in that regard is that it doesn't have to be that we establish some fully functioning system that will, completely somehow overturn or do battle with the established system as it exists. I think that it's important to understand that whether it comes to the Federal Reserve or any number of other issues, that we can start establishing alternatives that simply replace the system that exists gradually, piecemeal, if need be, so that you don't have to stop using the Federal Reserve notes and the U.S. dollar all at once and be rid of it in some big dramatic blow. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that people can get around it bit by using complementary currencies and the like, and to try to build up alternative systems. So I think there's always a more realistic way of trying to get around these things. And it's not an easy path. It's not going to be a straightforward line. It's not going to always be comfortable. But I think that if we don't do this now, I mean, it's certainly not going to get any easier in the future. And in fact, with some of the technological advances, if you want to frame it that way, that we're facing in this day and age, I mean, we really are facing, I think, some of the potentially the last generations of human history, at least humankind as we've known it before, as we start figuring out how to mess with the genome itself and create, beings that have never existed before, which sounds like science fiction fantasy until you start looking into the transhumanist agenda and things that are being worked on right now. So I think it's exceptionally important that people really do take this information to heart at this particular point in time, before things slip away into something that really cannot be brought under control. And we are facing that within the next few generations as people get more and more enmeshed in this matrix that's being created. So again, there's a lot to say there, but I think you're right. I think the map analogy is a good one. And I think what we need to do is to start charting that terrain for ourselves rather than waiting for some governmental authority or what have you to come and tell us, what the terrain looks like.
Well, this is absolutely, I can't argue with a single thing that you just said, I gotta tell you. And the fact to me that I recently had a discussion with another radio host, and it was off the air, but we were discussing, exactly how large the problem has become for those of us who are starting to understand that there is a problem. And, the reality was, well, what is it that can be done now that this matrix, this overlapping, and I don't mean just the technological matrix, but I mean the entire matrix, the psychosocial constructs that have been laid over us by traditional social means, by digital means, by financial means, all of these things which have been constructed over time and overlapped and interlocked. They are a large and tremendously formidable construct intermingled with one another, all of them. And the fact to me is that if we begin on the bottom in a way and begin to disconnect by alternative means, like, in other words, if you begin to obtain your food, just for example, if you begin to obtain your food on a local level, and you begin to, sort of fund the farmers directly, and you take the larger grocery centers out of the equation a bit, that begins to change the way things will be done. If you take that and begin to say barter with your neighbors more, as opposed to utilizing the banks, and you take the banks out of the equation, it changes the landscape. And if you begin this ripple effect from that small center, and there are many, many, many millions of ripple effects, you begin to sort of decouple the lower end of things from that larger construct, I think, in a wider sense. And this is one strategic way that this can begin to happen. So not just sitting there and saying, here's this big, huge, overlapping, overarching thing that is just, enclosed the entire planet. There's nothing that can be done about it because we don't have another planet to go to. You can begin to sort of decouple the smaller things and then stack the effects on top of one another slowly. And I think that would shake the very foundations of what it is that is being constructed. And that, to me, I think is one of the most important messages that any of the alternative media journalists or hosts or bloggers or whatever should get to, is that if you begin to resist on these smaller collective levels and you begin to be people interacting with one another in a real way, and you do things in a different fashion, you will change the overall atmosphere and the overall creation of all these things. At least this was my feeling. Do you think that's overly optimistic?
No, I agree. I think if if we are to have any effect in actually changing the system as it exists, it can and will only come about through things that look like baby steps, and that won't be I think the dramatic big confrontation that a lot of people are waiting for. But I think that so much of the infrastructure that's been slotted into place by the Department of Homeland Security and all of these other insane governmental institutions out of control are very much geared towards that type of dramatic confrontation that people think is going to happen. I think they're very much prepared for, and in fact even expecting people to at some point break and to spill out onto the streets in riots and protest. And we know from the documents that were released by insider from the World Bank and the IMF in 1999-2000 by Greg Palast, we know that basically this is a blueprint for economic collapse that has been used in country after country around the world, that they really do plan at a certain stage that there will be something called, that they even call the IMF riot, that eventually when things come to a breaking point and the austerity combined with the lack of purchasing power, etc., becomes too much for the average person to bear, eventually they will spill out onto the streets and they will start rioting. And through that, the powers that shouldn't be can even implement more of their agenda, because of course that's a convenient crisis for them to use to grab even more kind of emergency powers. And so this is all part of the plan. And unfortunately, the IMF riot that has been used around the world is going to come home to roost at a certain point. We've already seen that starting to hit the periphery, for example, the periphery of Europe in recent years, as those types of riots have started in Europe with the collapse of the Euro system, the slow motion collapse as it continues to take place. And it is going to hit home certainly in the United States at some point. And I think when that point occurs, it's going to be a question of whether people are simply going to try to riot and march on Washington with pitchforks, or whether they're going to have actual alternatives put in place that they can rely on during those times of crisis. And those alternatives have to be we have to start constructing them now so that they are there, they are in place, and they do exist, and they are that thing that people can rely on that has nothing to do with the system of control that's been slotted into place around us, that has nothing to do with the Federal Reserve and their notes that they print out of nothing. It is something that completely bypasses all of that, and I think you're exactly right. That involves just trading with your neighbors more, trading locally, trading online through cryptocurrencies and other ways of doing it. It doesn't have to be just going local and going off the grid. I mean, you can find lots of different ways to reach out in different ways that bypass the system that exists. And I think it's all of those hundreds and hundreds of different bypasses that we can find, whether it be a cryptocurrency or an alternative currency like Colorado Mountain Hours. I had someone on my program to talk about that at one point, or anything else, Ithaca Hours. I mean, there's different things that exist in pretty much every municipality around the United States and across the globe that people can find that are again just those one or two ways that people can find to build something alternative to what exists right now. And I think, again, we have to be doing that now, because unfortunately in the very near future, I think we're going to start seeing some very worrying things developing, and developing by design. I think we've been engineered into a monetary collapse that will likely coincide with some sort of geopolitical events, and we can already see the outlines of that with what's happening with Russia right now, and also the emerging narrative of China as being part of that block of resistance to the NATO powers that look like the outlines for a potential World War III scenario. And I think before we get to that point, we have to start detaching ourselves from this system. And it doesn't have to be all at once, because that's another thing that people use as their excuse to basically stop doing anything about what's going on. If it has to be this overarching system that replaces the system that exists all in one big dramatic blow, then we can just wait for that system to come along, rather than doing the hard work of actually sourcing out for example, local trading communities that we can get involved with and things like that at this point in time. Even if it is a baby step, I think it's more important that we get involved in those baby steps now, so while we have the time to do that, rather than try to look for the system that will save us once the collapse is already in place.
couldn't have said it any better myself. And, you know, I really do love the way that you know, you put it as participating in those baby steps could be extremely useful. And they're not necessarily baby steps when there are so many pebbles in the pond, because if the pond becomes a big, you know, series of ripples, you don't have just that calm, still water that was there before. And that was what I was trying to say. And those ripples do meet and interlock, and you could create entire new systems out of things that appear to be very independent and very simple once they begin to meet. And I think that's definitely the way to go. And that was one of the points that I always find myself having trouble making. You know, that some people say, well, you want to do these small things and you want other people to do these small things. Well, what good does that do against the larger machine? And I think that is the answer, is that once all those parts, you know, if we need to manufacture a large machine to deal with the large machine, okay, I'll accept that for a moment and tell you that first we need to build the parts. So if we manufacture each of the parts, eventually we'll get enough coherent parts that could be worked together to make another machine, which doesn't necessarily have to be based on these, you know, invented currencies and numbers that are theoretical and really don't exist, where they begin trading off this massive amount of debt that is more than, you know, God knows how many times the actual number of, you know, the actual value of the true assets on the planet now that are floating out there being batted around by these financial institutions as they exist now. And it's very, very important to think about it like that. So I'm very glad that you had that to say. I'll tell you.
Well, let me interject there, because I think it's important also, philosophically speaking, that we don't fall into the dialectic trap, by which I mean that what we're facing is this overarching system of control that I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with in its various parts and functions. I mean, for example, the Federal Reserve and its control over the monetary supply, and the Department of Homeland Security and the National Security Agency, and all of this national security state apparatus that's been put into place to monitor and control and work against the citizenry itself, rather than the supposed threats from outside, which have always been used to justify its existence. Again, I think people understand the broad outlines of this system, but I think it's important not to simply counter this big overarching system of control by looking for another alternative overarching system of control that will somehow, you know, be better than the one that currently exists. I think we have to fight this ideologically by constructing not a system, not the totalizing system that will somehow replace what's going on, but really institutionalizing the exact opposite idea, which is freedom, really, which is the idea that there will not be one single system that everyone has to subscribe to. And I think the monetary example is, again, a perfect example of this. We live in a system where there's the legal tender law that makes the Federal Reserve notes into basically not the only currency that exists in the country, but certainly the dominant one, because obviously it can be used to tender any debt and for the payment of taxes. So it basically by default becomes the dominant system, the dominant the piece of paper that everyone needs to chase all their lives. Why on earth would we replace that system with another system where everybody has to use this one currency that's going to be set up in this one way that will be the answer to this? Why not have a number of competing systems that will offer different people different ways of transacting things in different situations, so that you can have an online cryptocurrency for your online transactions, and you can have a local currency based on the hour system or the let system or what have you for local transactions with local businesses. You can have something else for medium range transactions or transactions with out of town corporations and the like. Oh. So that again, it's not a system building a totalizing system to combat the totalizing system that exists. It's using lots of different pieces and having the freedom to move between them, because I think the fundamental part that we have to be keeping in mind when we're constructing this alternative is that there has to be the the leeway in the system to have the free decision of whether or not to participate in this or that, whether this or that currency or this or that system of governance, if people want to go down that road. And so I think it's at a deeper level than this, because again, a lot of people are still trapped in the mindset that what they need is just a different overarching system of control that will somehow be better off for them. Whereas I want to really get people to question that fundamental assumption and look at different ways that they can construct a system that is not based on a system that is really based on freedom and the free exchange of ideas and the freedom to participate or not participate in any given part or facet of that system.
Right, and that in that way you could instead of having a monolithic system, I just didn't really state that very well, but I've got to say, instead of being a monolithic system, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a series of competing systems, but it could be a series of systems that are able to cooperate. Even the smallest one could cooperate with another one and another one and another one. And these things could be intermingled a bit without having to be monolithic and controlled by these larger entities as they are now. There are various ways to organize this, to not organize it even, and to have these things just be functional with one another so that they're not completely incoherent as systems go. But it doesn't have to be based on this as you said, the Federal Reserve note being the primary sort of thing that so many people have to chase in a particular area in order to perpetuate their lifespan. That's a very, very key issue. I'm very glad that you brought that, clarified that for me. I appreciate that. I've got to say that you cover a great deal of things, a great many things on your site. And like I said, not only just news and historical events, but just simple philosophical discussions and more complex philosophical discussions, where you have aired the sides of many coins, I would say, in a way. You know what I mean? And I have always appreciated your work for that reason. Like when you were discussing the alternatives to the monetary system and you started talking about, instead of the debt-based currency, the credit-based currencies that were a possibility, and the ideas that silver and gold, although they are, among the many solutions that could be had for exchange, they are not the end-all and be-all of solutions. There are many, many different ways to approach this issue. And I really have always appreciated the way that you've done that.
Well, let me just say thank you for that, because it really does seem an uphill battle at times, trying to combat that mentality that a lot of people have, that they're really all just looking for the next kind of savior, whether that savior be, gold and silver, or whether that savior be a political candidate or what have you. I think I'm always trying to fight back against that tendency, to try to show people that there are lots of different ways of looking at this or that issue. There are lots of different things to consider. And, for example, with that example that you just cited there, I know there's a lot of gold bugs out there that will tell you, well, gold is the only way to organize an economic system. And I think it's just, a lot of people just don't have the capacity for nuance in their thinking and separating out different uses for different things in different contexts and different times that give rise to different variable ways that things can be developed. So that, for example, with gold and silver, they are great stores of value and historically have been, but to base an entire economy on the vagaries of what you can mine out of the ground seems to me insane in a lot of ways, and doesn't really reflect the reality of a population that can go up and down, and not necessarily in proportion to the amount of gold and silver that are being mined out of the ground. And so I think we have to think about things in a more nuanced way. And so that's what I'm always attempting to do. So, feedback like that, really does, encourage me.
Well, the problem is that, individuals always have what is literally prejudice, and it is to prejudge. You have sort of preconceived notions about things which are based on various bits of input that you've received over the years as an individual. And sometimes, I also, have to struggle with getting over those things and saying to them, listen, I understand that you have this belief that this is this. Okay, that's all there is to it for you. But if you can sort of step back from that for a moment and imagine that that's not necessarily the singular one answer, you may find that there are other answers that will work just as well. And that is always a difficult thing when you're trying to convince someone to simply give the information that you've taken the time to cultivate for them. Even it's sort of mental day in court for them. You know what I mean? And that is a troublesome thing sometimes, and is part of the major struggle when it comes to sort of disseminating information, which is not necessarily part of that, collective understanding, part of the acceptable zeitgeist, if you will, that is often propagated by many of the major media outlets. And this is really what it all comes down to, in my mind, is getting people to step away from their preconceived notions. And sometimes people are prepared to do so, and sometimes you have to give them a little help, and there's even situations where you cannot help them. And I've got to say that there was one individual, and I can't remember who it was, but very early on when I was starting to explore utilizing, the internet, the web, to try and disseminate information for people, I ran into someone who said, there's a lot of people that are in search of a savior. And this had to do not with necessarily religious connotations, but just with information in general. They're in search of a savior. They're in search of a singular voice. They're in search of sort of the, big daddy figure to give them all the information. And sometimes you need to explain to them that their actual saviors, their real world saviors, for themselves, if they're going to insist on having one, is much easier to find if they look in a mirror and they utilize themselves to become their own saviors. And
well, that's always been a key and integral part of my message, and something that I've always tried to stress in all of the work that I do, because I to the extent that people look at me as just a replacement for the authority figures that have lied to them all their lives, I think that's a sign of failure on my part, because what I'm attempting to do is to get people to realize that the system of authority figures telling people what to think, believe, and how to act, etc., is itself the problem. It's not that you need a better authority figure. It's that relying on those authority figures is the problem, because that obfuscates and basically disconnects people from the hard work. It certainly is hard work, but the necessary work of thinking for themselves. So I hope to present evidence and about whatever topic it is that I'm presenting on, and obviously I try to cite my sources and back it up with information that people can go and verify for themselves. But it's always been an integral part of the mission of the Corbett Report that people do verify it for themselves. Because again, otherwise people are just taking my word for it. So unfortunately, as a media producer, I do get a lot of feedback that does involve people as saying, for example, I always get people asking me, what do you think about this particular research, or what do you think about this particular news source? And it always strikes me as a failure on my part when I get that type of feedback, because again, if you can't make that decision for yourself, or you don't want to make that decision for yourself, then what really have you gained from this media that you're listening to? It's designed to be as thought provoking, and hopefully to provoke people into actually searching for information themselves. So to the extent that happens, I think that what I'm doing is a success. And to the extent that people come to basically expect some other talking head on the screen. I mean, people don't know me. They only know the work that I produce. If they're looking to me to try to solve their problems for them, then I would say that what I've done is a failure.
And in that context, I got to say also that your presentation, I think it was in France not long ago, on open source media, is a good place to look to understand what the methodology is that you have utilized anyway to gather this information and to understand what the concept is and why it's so important that open source media is constructed much in the way. I'm not saying that you're the only guy who does this well, but you are a prime example of it. And I was really taken aback actually by that presentation you did there as well. So,
well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. For people who are interested, it's called Open Source Journalism, and it's there on my website. It's good to hear that it was an effective presentation, because in some ways that's basically the presentation I've been preparing for since the website began, because it was something that I specifically wanted from the very moment of the inception of the website. It was extremely important to me that there would be a list of documentation citing all of the sources for everything that I was talking about in every podcast, interview, what have you. It was always integral to me that I cite the sources and have it there, right there, ready to click on. It's such a basic idea. It's such an absolutely basic idea that it kind of boggled my mind at that time that there were so few podcasts, so few, internet-based sources that were actually really doing that in a thoroughgoing manner in the alternative media. And certainly when you looked at the mainstream media, I mean, just even a few years ago, if you looked at your average New York Times or Washington Times or Washington Post or whatever article it might be, there would generally be zero hyperlinks of any sort. They've since started hyperlinking sources here and there, occasionally a smattering, but it's always boggled my mind that here we are in this incredible worldwide web of literally, I mean, the repository of the sum of human knowledge at our fingertips, and so little of that is really being utilized, I think, to the extent that it could be. And it's a pretty simple idea, again, just to cite your sources and to put the information out there for free, freely available, is another extremely important part of this that I think is part of the power that we have now to step around the gatekeepers of information that have existed in human society for centuries and centuries and centuries, perhaps for the entirety of human civilization. We really do have a way to reach directly to people all around the globe, nearly instantaneously, and not completely for free, but certainly for very little cost for the average kind of person in the developed industrial world, at any rate. Which is, again, it's an exciting time to be alive in a lot of respects, and I just hope that people understand that, grasp it, and utilize it to its full. And I don't claim to be, the best authority on this, but it's something that I've definitely been thinking about since the inception of the website, and has really been important to me as part of what I'm doing, so that people, again, can take this information and actually use it and actually interact with it and start thinking about it and wrestling with it for themselves, rather than just listening to some so-called authority pronouncing on things from on high.
Precisely. And, the end result, just as an aside to the people that are enjoying listening to my show, I mean, my show is pretty new and it's only a radio show, but I am trying to present the best information that I can and bring you people that you can look at on the internet and check out and understand where it is they're coming from, what their information is about. And quite honestly, as I say all the time in my posts and things like this, come on and be the media. The reason for that, the inspiration for that was partially from you, because the actual reason why this radio show exists, it was partially your encouragement, not necessarily directly, but just the overall message of, create for yourself the information that you want to present out there. Don't just rely on someone else to do it. This was the kind of thing that I wanted to find a vehicle to begin to present, my understanding of, whether it be historical events or the current events or, things relating directly to the human condition, whatever they may be. If I am not out there actively participating and trying to, at least add my voice to the giant chorus of humanity, which is now interacting on this worldwide scale, then I by no means have any right to complain. This is a personal thing for me, but I have no right to complain about the fact that my viewpoint is not represented if I am not attempting to represent it. And the only way to do so would be to come out and bring a presentation that features the best of what it is I can find. And it may not be the greatest of all time radio shows or the most enlightening things in the world, but if I present one idea that causes one person to act, to change things in the smallest way, again, the ripple effect is possible. And this is why I named the radio show the way it is, and why it is I am always saying, be the media. Also in that vein, if anybody wants to join in on the conversation, if you don't mind, James, if anyone wants to join in, we can take calls at 718-717-8296 if anyone wants to join in. And I'll take calls. James may not remain with me much longer here, but I'll take calls afterwards as well. So, you also out there listening to us can join in and be the media, even if it's only for 5 minutes. You can do it too. And I encourage anyone who has a point of view to try to find a vehicle, whether it be a blog or a website, or, and don't be intimidated by the massive amount of work that, say, someone like James puts out there. Your contribution could be the most important thing to someone somewhere, and you never know what it is. You could start by bringing them the correct information, bringing them the real viewpoint, bringing them a different way to look at things, or a different way to examine things than they may have considered in the past. So I think that the participation aspect that you have always encouraged among your listeners, readers, etc., is key, and I hope that the Ochelli effect will do that as well on some level, and perhaps you never know who it is you may influence. So always keep that in mind as well.
Well, I can't tell you how happy I am to hear that feedback. It's always the best feedback I can possibly hear, that I've played a part, no matter how small, in prompting people towards doing this, because again, that really is the raison d'etre for the Corbett Report and exactly what I'm attempting to do. So I do appreciate that. And I also want to stress that it's not necessarily that I think everyone needs to start a blog or start a podcast or what have you. I think it can be just even tiny things like the conversations that you have with people in your daily life. It can be emails that you send to your friends or family or what have you, can be part of that ripple effect as well. It's simply making this information a part of your life and a part of who you are and a part of how you interact with the world is, I think, the fundamental part of this. And again, this is something that everyone can do every single day, in simply the choices of what you choose to spend your time on, what you choose to spend your money on, what you choose to spend your time interacting with or talking about or focusing on, really can make that change in society in the bigger scheme of things. And once people start to realize that, once they really internalize that the power ultimately does really lie with the people, then we can actually start to use that power, I think, for changing this world for the better.
Well, I got to tell you one other thing too, James. I have been dying to ask you about something for a while now. I believe it was the third anniversary now of the Fukushima event occurred. And the fact that we were quite enthralled on not only the mainstream level, but in the alternative media with this Malaysian Air situation at that time, and the fact that there wasn't very much focus, to my knowledge anyway, on that situation, and the fact that you are there in Japan. I mean, I would find it extremely valuable to know what your viewpoint is on that situation in general, or the current state of affairs, or anything regarding this.
Well, you are right. We just did pass the three-year anniversary of the tsunami that triggered the Fukushima event on March 11th, 2011. So we did just see that marker come and go. And unlike the first and second anniversaries, there was a lot less coverage even in the alternative media of this one. I think, as you say, there's just other things that have distracted a lot of people. Unfortunately, things do not seem to be getting any better from the perspective or the viewpoint of for the people here in Japan fighting against the restarts of the nuclear reactors. For people who don't know, basically over the past 3 years, the entirety of the nuclear reactors in Japan, all 51 of them, 52 of them, have been shut down and for maintenance of one sort or another, and not turned back on as Japan kind of figures out a new regulatory regime and safety inspection standards and et cetera, that will need to be in place before they restart these reactors. So Japan is at the moment nuclear free, in terms of nuclear energy. However, the Abe administration that was voted in last December is now basically basing their new energy policy on the idea that nuclear power will continue to be the central plank of Japan's energy plan for the coming decades. A 180-degree turn from the last administration, by the way, which had proposed the idea of being nuclear free in Japan by 2050, which was an ambitious idea, but certainly it was good to see a government panel actually recommending that, and the government tentatively accepting that until the administration was voted out. So that fight still continues, and unfortunately, I think there's a sense of political futility setting in here amongst some of the anti-nuclear campaigners, whereas we saw literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, depending on who you want to believe for the number counts, turning out in the streets of Tokyo last summer and the summer before to protest the government and its actions or lack thereof on the Fukushima situation in particular and the nuclear situation in general. That has dwindled considerably, so that, for example, there was a rally in Tokyo just the other day to try to push home that message that the Japanese people do not want nuclear power of any sort, that only managed to draw about 5,000 people. So considerably down from where it was at the height of the protest movement here. And perhaps that's a sign that a lot of people just don't expect that the Abe government is going to be responsive to these types of protests. So again, it is an uphill battle. And of course, with the situation at the site itself, continuing water leakage on a daily basis into the ocean, and continuing accumulation of radioactive water from the water that they're pumping through in the reactors 1, 2, and 3 that have melted down and are in some various states of composition at the bottom of the reactors, eating their way through the concrete in states that we can't even determine because no one can actually get close enough to take any sort of survey of the terrain. It's still a very, very dire situation in a lot of respects, and unfortunately that hasn't really been improved, and there's still really no prospect that this is going to be anything that can be put under control anytime in the near or foreseeable future, as even the Japanese government has admitted that the technology needed to actually get these reactors stable and under control and get their core materials removed doesn't even exist yet. So again, it's very much an uphill battle on a number of fronts. Not a lot of encouraging information coming out at all. And unfortunately, it's even starting to slip off of the alternative media radar to a large extent. So I have FukushimaUpdate.com. That's my website devoted specifically to Fukushima to hopefully counteract that and hopefully keep people up to date about what's happening. So people can go there and take a look at the information, both about the latest news of the day and also quite a large repository of information throughout the duration of the crisis, historical information that people can go back to now.
Right. And, I just, and I also wonder on a personal level, I mean, how disconcerting do you find this personally, being that you're in Japan?
Well, I mean, it's obviously it's a cause of concern, and there are things that myself and my family do to try to mitigate those concerns, including the way that we source our food. We use a cooperative here that uses only organic ingredients and also does radiation testing of all of their products that they make available to the public. So we do that. We avoid seafood at this point unless we know where it's coming from and it's coming from the other side of the planet. And things like that, things of that nature that we're doing on the personal level. For the people in the Fukushima region itself, the disaster is just almost unthinkable. There are still refugees from that crisis who are still living in gymnasiums, sleeping on floors, that have no realistic prospect of returning to their homes anytime in the foreseeable future, and no desire to do so even if that opportunity did present itself. There are still tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people whose lives have been irrevocably changed by this. So I think there has to be those people have to be kept in mind, first and foremost in this disaster. And unfortunately, the Tokyo Electric Power Company that owns and operates the Fukushima plant and the Japanese government aren't really making it any easier on any of these people. And even though lots of different things, money, etc., have been promised to these people, it has been a constant fight to even attempt to get those things that have already been promised. So again, I think a lot more attention needs to be paid to that, specifically in the Fukushima region and the people who have been directly affected most obviously by this accident.
All right. Well, I've added Jim Funky, who is a host on the UCY network, also a Boiler Room Radio, one of my favorite shows, to the conversation. You there, Jim?
Yes, sir, I am. All
right. I think Jim has a question for James.
Good evening, James Corbett. It's nice to speak with you, sir. I watch your Boiling Frogs post and a lot of the other things you do on YouTube all the time. I have one question for you. The videos that came out from TEPCO that showed the inside of the reactor, well, when they were going to start transferring the fuel rods, and you saw all this brand new equipment and all this bright green paint. Do you believe that for 1 second, that that's the inside of one of those reactors in Fukushima Prefecture?
Well, I think you're right to be quizzical about that, because, again, I think for anyone who looks at that and then understands what actually took place at the plant and tries to reconcile those two things, I mean, it does stretch the bonds of credulity. And we do know that, I mean, they even admit that they do manipulate the images because to protect, the trade secrets and things about nuclear power plants that the public isn't allowed to know. So they have admitted that they do manipulate these images. To what extent, and to what extent this is all a production that's put on for show, I can't say with any definitive, evidence, but I certainly do have my suspicions about how much of that really is real at all. And I think you're right, again, to look at these pristine looking images of these pristine inside of the reactor, when we know that, of course, the entire site, and of course the reactor 4 in particular, was exceptionally damaged by the explosions that took place there. So it is, I must admit, I certainly reserve my credulity on that issue in particular.
I had an issue with that as well, because to my mind, and perhaps I'm, being a bit foolish about it, but the thing is, if you have that level of radiation being pumped at what is ostensibly a digital or a camera which has all this hardware, but there's no interference in those images to show the reaction of radiation. And I know for sure that anytime they've tried to film things that were realistically pumping out that level of whatever, that there's always interference in the images, and those images were extremely clean. To my eye anyway, and of course my eyes aren't the most trustworthy, but I saw no interference there with the equipment even. And you would have thought that if you were dealing with a radioactive situation like that, I mean, even the old film cameras that were, more mechanical in nature had difficulty maintaining themselves during the photographic, episodes of other radiological events. So isn't that kind of strange as well, guys?
Well, no, that's a good point. And again, people can compare those images that we're talking about to the images, for example, that they were taking of the insides of the reactor buildings, throughout the crisis. And specifically a couple of years ago, I'm thinking of some of the images that I saw that have exactly those hallmarks that you're talking about, the streaks and flecks and various things that go on, because again, the radiation is interfering with the mechanics of the camera systems. So I think you're right. Again, it's just another reason to be highly skeptical about what we're seeing and what we're being allowed to see about what's going on in those buildings.
I have one last question, and then I'll let Chuck have his show back. What would it take to make you get off that island, get your family and get off that island?
I suppose it would take something beyond what is currently taking place at the moment. That is to say that although what is happening right now obviously is a concern, it is a concern in certain identifiable ways. The radiation right now is specifically a concern, obviously, at the site, and the radioactive water that's accumulating in the storage tanks and the structural integrity of those storage tanks are obviously big concerns. Also, what we know is being pumped out into the ocean on a daily basis. But to a certain extent, all of those are known quantities. I think it would take something different. For example, the confirmation that the corium had breached the concrete in the building itself, or collapse of the spent fuel pool, or something of that sort that would change the status at that point. But with something like that, with the collapse of the spent fuel pool or something of that nature, again, that would be something that you probably want to consider evacuating the northern hemisphere. So I'm not sure if returning to Canada at that point would even be helpful. So I mean, obviously I'm watching what's happening at the site, but just at this current point, I think that the status quo is not something that is going to prompt me to leave Japan.
And you've got to be watching it closely because of your proximity, for sure. I mean, as we discussed at one point, I mean, you do have a family also. It's not just yourself. And, but like you said, I mean, certain disastrous situations that would occur, it would be almost futile to attempt to flee, if certain things went on, huh?
Yes, again, it depends how it happens. It depends what's happening. Again, radiation isn't a magic thing that magically teleports. I mean, it goes in certain, it transports through various mechanisms that again can be identified and can be measured. And so I mean, things like, I'm always telling people to go to something like safecast.org, which again is a network of independently run Geiger counters and radiation monitors that are throughout Japan and in fact throughout the world, that are being, again, independently maintained and correlated in real time to give radiation hotspot measurements and basically show people what the radiation readings are in various places. You can go there and take a look at any given time, not only in Japan, but in the United States. And it's interesting to me because, there are areas of the United States that certainly have higher levels of radioactivity readings right now than the area of Japan where I'm in. And people tend to think, oh, Japan is just a tiny little island. But basically on the bigger scheme of things, again, it's actually bigger than you might expect. And every time there's a earthquake in Hokkaido, for example, I'll get phone calls from concerned family and friends back in Canada that don't understand just how big Japan is. And no, we didn't feel that at all. So again, we have to understand that there are things going on that are beyond this. And it also worries me that people are concentrating on Fukushima to the exclusion of things that are happening in their own backyard, so that some of the very serious nuclear concerns that are taking place, for example, in the United States, get overlooked and blamed on Fukushima as kind of I think, a way that the nuclear industry in the United States can help obfuscate some of the sins that are going on in that industry in America's own backyard. And some of the, I think, more direct threats to a lot of people in the United States comes from local sources rather than what's happening in Fukushima. So I think there's a sort of meta level on which we have to be concerned about not just what's happening in this one locality, but the issue in general, which again, it should be noted that the exact type of reactor that was used in Fukushima, the GE Mark I, is something that's actually quite common in the United States. I believe there are over 20, I think it's 21 or 22 of those reactors in the United States currently operating today, privy to the exact same types of problems that could that affected the Fukushima plant. Right.
And that is a good point also, that the relative distance that Fukushima has from us, and it being utilized sort of as an excuse to exclude the idea that local sources of radioactivity could be raising the levels here is really something that I do think is often not really looked at by a lot of us, both in the mainstream and the alternative media. We don't generally focus on a lot of this stuff because we are very much distracted by the idea that Fukushima is kind of bleeding out to the entire world. which it is, but it is not.
So is Hanford.
Yeah, exactly. And so is
Yes,
Hanford,
yes.
and so is, the problems that are all up and down the East Coast, in fact, of the United States. I just moved from an area where there were, constantly, test alarms and, one of those areas where they actually handed us the pills and everything else. You know what I mean? And, sometimes I think that, it is kind of a point of distraction for some people to not look at their own, in their own backyards, as you say. So I think that's a very important thing to bring up, and that, people should be more aware of what's close to home as well.
And just as one specific example of that phenomenon, I was tracking a story in my home and native land of Canada back a couple of years ago when the Toronto Star revealed that there was actually a GE Hitachi uranium pellet plant that processed uranium in the suburbs of Toronto, that there were residents of the community that had no idea what the plant was. They just saw it every day. They had no idea that it was doing this type of work, or the types of risks that a plant like that posed in terms of radiation exposure. And this was revealed a couple of years ago by a report. Oh yeah, that plant that's been there for decades and decades. Yeah, it's processing uranium pellets for GE Hitachi. And this caused a lot of furor, and a lot of people were suddenly concerned about the issue. And the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission eventually did release a report taking a look at the safety precautions that go on there and deeming it to be a safe working environment or what have you. But again, it's just another example of that phenomenon that people tend to think of this nuclear threat as something that, oh, well, it's at Fukushima, it's there, and anything that happens there radiologically must be from Fukushima, whereas they literally don't know what's happening in their own backyard. So that's, it's something that we have to be thinking about, I think, more broadly. And obviously for people here in Japan, there's 50 other nuclear power plants to worry about now that are gradually going to start coming online if the Japanese government has its way. So I think this is what the real fight is at this point, and something that we all have to be concerned about.
It's also worthwhile to remember that we are still contending, with the background radiation being raised in the hemisphere by the Chernobyl accident. That is still a factor, though quite widely forgotten by many, I would say. And, all of these things, in fact, and the entire nuclear landscape is something that needs to be better understood. So
right.
that,
and don't forget decades of open air nuclear testing that also left an identifiable, and to this day identifiable, trace of radioactive elements in the ocean, for example. So now, for example, when they're looking for the trace of the Fukushima signature, they have to extract the trace of the open air testing that contributed to some of the radiological elements that are identifiable in the ocean. So again, people's understanding of this probably isn't where it should be, and that might be rife topic for a future report of mine.
What about all the depleted uranium laying on the sand over in Iraq?
Yes, absolutely. Another terrible situation that's led to literally the worst incidents of birth defects in certain areas, including Fallujah and other places that have ever been detected and ever identified. And they want you to believe that that is coincidental, but of course, I think we probably do know better than that. But yes,
I have one question out of the room for you, James.
Oh, yeah, James. Jim is looking at the chat room, so he has a question from the chat room for you.
Okay, but I think we'll have to make this the last one before I go. But
no problem.
Yes.
Okay. This is from one of our other hosts, Michael from Primer Time Radio. He asks if Stuxnet was on the Siemens control units at Fukushima. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know that specifically. I can't say that was the case. I have heard that alluded to. I have no confirmation of that. If anyone has any specific evidence of that, I'm certainly interested to hear about it, because obviously that would be a huge piece of the puzzle. Yes. But I don't have any specific evidence of that. That's not to say it's not out there. I just don't know of it.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, sir, and take care of yourself and your family.
Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jim.
Yep.
So, James, I realize that you want to get to wrapping up here. And I think we've covered a pretty wide span of interesting information and giving people a really good feel of the type of reporting that you do and what it is you're all about in general, as far as, your methodology, your philosophical approach to the information that it is that you're putting out. And I've also alluded to some of those things specifically tonight, but there is a plethora of stuff at your website, your main website, which is corbettreport.com, one word, right? And also you had the Fukushima site there. What was that again?
FukushimaUpdate.com. But again, people can just go to corbettreport.com and the links are there to all of my other various tentacles at the International Forecaster, at Boiling Frogs Post, Global Research, my collaboration with Media Monarchy on New World Next Week. There's a lot of different things that I have. So corbettreport.com is the one-stop shop that people should go to, and they can find links to everything else from there.
And you can even find a couple of appearances by me on there, just discussing the Lee Harvey Oswald topic on James's Corbett Report Radio. I think the first one was in 2011, something like that. And so I encourage everybody and everybody who is interested in a source which is quite standalone in a lot of ways and very, very much outside of the mainstream, and yet, not one of these guys who is just running around with a tinfoil hat on, as they like to tell us that most of us are, and really a responsible, solid, and well thought out journalist in general, who has created a great many, I just don't even know the number of presentations that you've done, podcasts, interviews, videos, short documentaries, reports for Boiling Frogs, as we brought up, global research, TV, the New World Next Week, all of this stuff. Like he said, you can find it all at corbettreport.com. So is there anything else you'd like to add, James, tonight?
I think that's it for me for tonight, but I just want to thank you for having me on. And once again, congratulations on the new program. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you produce.
All right. And I appreciate your time, James. Thank you so much for coming on with me tonight.
All right. Take care.
Take care. So we have so many things that we could discuss now, based on this. If Jim wants to come back on and talk about any more of this stuff, feel free, brother, anytime. Of course, I'll just wing it myself from here and discuss all of my fun thoughts about what it is we just covered. If you have if you have me or if you have the UCY, in your friends list on your Skype, go right ahead and join me or give me a call. Anything is welcome. James kind of had to cut it short there because he had a time concern, but I think that we definitely stepped into a bunch of different areas here tonight. And so this way, that little complaint that was had that I was doing a lot of JFK stuff, I think just maybe went out the window, hopefully. And, when I had said that I was going to bring James on and discuss this, I was at first going to keep my focus on the Federal Reserve and not really delve outside of that, but I just sort of felt that a really good overview, and I utilize, Corbett's site myself to begin some of my work, and in some cases to verify some of the work when I'm looking into a wide range of topics. And I think that he's just a really valuable asset, to the information pool that we are all swimming in at this point. And I just thought that it would be an excellent time to bring him out and explain that, yeah, he was part of the inspiration for why the Ochelli effect came into being. And what it is that my mission is not exactly as his is, but there are some similarities here, and I think it was definitely of value to bring that to your attention tonight. So, moving forward, I've got to say that some of the other things that have gone on this week have been of I don't know what to say. I mean, the whole Malaysian Air thing, I have finally sort of settled on the idea that this is nothing but a head game that's being played by the media in general with those of us who might have these types of concerns to keep us away from a great many other topics. As I examine some other things like the situation in Crimea and the sort of posture that the Russian Federation, I believe they're tagging it as at this point, or, you know, Putin and his collective there are doing. I think that these things are of a little more importance. I think that during that time, we also did not focus on the Fukushima situation. I think that that was part of the purpose of giving us this Malaysian Air mystery. Although I've got to say that it is very, very strange that we're dealing with a government that seems either so inept or so unwilling to cooperate with information agencies of any kind, including the mainstream, that they're tripping over themselves trying to create different narratives to keep the level of mass distraction at its highest point. And regardless of what it is that the Russian Federation settles on, I think that still we are not looking at the great sort of big match that's going to light the fire, that is going to put us in a place where we are looking at the official and complete declaration of the Third World War. To be honest, it seems as though a lot of it is just these Civil War sort of, considerations that are popping up there. I mean, a lot of the individuals that are in that area throughout the entire group of countries that we're talking about on that border are, in some ways, this is sort of an ethnic struggle where you have people that are ethnically Russian, that are speaking Russian, that pretty much are seeking to rejoin the Russian Federation as it is, or the, reformulated Soviet Union, or whatever it is you want to refer to it as. It seems as though a lot of them are seeking to rejoin where it was from whence they came. And I can't say that that is being made clear in any of the media that has been produced about it so far. I would say that there have been various mechanisms which throw up red flags to me, like the focus on the individuals with the Nazi tattoos and the agitators, and the lack of focus on U.S.-based or ostensibly based U.S. Assets, possibly in a provocateur role, in an agitator role, which has caused a lot of rather disturbing things to start to unfold there. And I think that a lot of that conflict is more akin to a civil war scenario than something that will actually reach out and extend itself further out into the world and metastasize into yet another worldwide conflict. But I always caution people to understand that in some ways we are quite already on the, not just the brink, but really truly involved in a World War type of scenario where many powers are fighting proxy wars that are not being covered by anybody. And there are also many sort of localized or seemingly localized events of warfare that are ongoing. The whole disturbance in Syria, which is, now in its, I believe it's in its third year, these things are ongoing. And if you look at the conditions that were during other times when we have said we were in a world war, and you take a realistic, not just from the surface and not just from what is being allowed to be disseminated among the normal, paid for by the government, supported media channels, and most of the acceptable talking heads that float about in the information stream, as it were. If you put those things aside and you start to take a realistic look at the actual level of strife that is on the planet on so many fronts, all we have really here is a lack of clear alliances in some cases, a lack of public proclamations, and we are already in a virtual third world war scenario. And I'm not necessarily an authority on this, but I do find it fascinating that it's kind of minimized in a way, that there are so many people dying on a daily basis in all of these scenarios that are unfolding in so many different places. And I think also was a very worthwhile point that we brought up, as far as the global landscape of things, the lack of context that's being had about Fukushima. In some cases, it's being minimized unnecessarily. In some cases, it is being over-dramatized to the extent that, when people see rises of background radiation in certain areas, they're not taking into account the more localized factors, the sort of what seem to be long in the past historical factors of other nuclear situations, whether it be the underground testing, the atmospheric testing, the failures of other facilities, the accidents that we have not heard about, the production of this stuff. And doesn't it just seem, just if you take it all in and you really begin to take it into account, doesn't it just seem as though that screwing around with this type of, energy production and weaponizing this stuff is just, one of the most insane, suicidal sort of ideas that has ever been unleashed on mankind in general. I can't seem to wrap my mind around it any other way than it's like a collective sort of mass suicidal ideation on the part of much of the population that at one time was believing that nuclear energy was clean and safe. I would much rather have soot in the atmosphere than this crap. And maybe it's just me, and maybe I have, a feeble understanding of these particular scientific, nuances here, but that's all I see, is that it's just something that, there are certain things that you just don't need to do. I mean, you could light your house on fire and burn it to the ground in the process of keeping yourself warm, but tomorrow you won't have a house. So what are we doing? I don't know. It even seems strange to me to say that, the pursuit of profit and the pursuit of expediency and the investments that have been made in this type of energy are of any sort of, value, that we can't abandon them fully because of the previous investment, whether it be from a scientific standpoint or from a purely financial, sort of view. This is just simply suicidal. And again, the depleted uranium utilized in more than one theater of battle, this stuff is probably one of the most disgusting and insidious uses I've ever even been privy to of anything of that nature. I remember very, very specifically watching something called, I think it was Beyond Treason was the name of it, which was a documentary having to do, partially at least, with the treatment of the population, the birth defects, the soldiers returning, and I found the idea of Beyond Treason, the phraseology of Beyond Treason to be quite fitting, because this was the granting of this stuff, I'm not even getting the right words out here. I mean, it's so sickening to think that that men and women that we ask to serve our country are being handed these tools and told to utilize them as if they were worthy of use in these type of situations, as if they weren't in one way or another exposing themselves to things that were going to eat up parts of their bodies, destroy their lives, destroy their offspring, and the impact on the local populations, regardless of what you think of them, regardless of what the political sort of correct idea or the acceptable sort of level of how much menace a population or a people could give to you. Exactly how spiritually vapid is that? How dead is that from a spiritual perspective to willingly and willfully, to give this stuff, to force this crap onto, those men and women who are doing a job over there and the population that they were either embattled with or interacting with or whatever, to unleash this on any human beings, regardless of their level of innocence, to inflict this type of malevolence and just evil on human beings is I don't know. It's beyond my realm of understanding. I mean, I can identify with the desire to destroy one's enemy. I can identify with the need to defend oneself. I can identify with having no choice but to answer violence with violence, or to deal with bullies, or to deal with those who think they have a right to do harm to others and to step in. I can do that. I can see that. I can feel that. But I can't imagine what would motivate anyone to do the insidious types of things that you see. And that's just handing these men and women these type of munitions knowingly, willfully, understanding the amount of damage that will be done by them. I don't know. Maybe it's just one of those things that I occupy my mind with that I ought not to. But I do. So, I'll take a little sip here. And I'll tell you what, if I did understand exactly what motivated the people that thought that that was a good idea, then I guess I would not be who I am, and I guess I couldn't possibly care enough to even try to speak to people, to even try to change minds, or to even have the desire to improve a single thing in this world. Perhaps I wouldn't have that desire if it wasn't for, the fact that I have children. And I don't mean to lie back on that like some people do and state always that the need to change the world is just for them. I think it's just that sort of gut level thing that comes from one's own DNA strands, whether it be physical or whether it be from a purely other, sort of plane, whether it be from a completely soul-based area of one's being. I guess it's actually that I give a damn. That's why these things will bother me. It is vexing at the very least. Besides that, though, we did also touch on the Federal Reserve, and I think that the concept of, our money and that system and the most unchallenged faith-based religion in the world is the idea of money and banks and currencies and countries that are supposedly behind them and the absolute faith that actually backs them instead of something tangible in any way, shape, or form. That is a worthwhile subject that I really do wish that I had a great deal more resources to explore. But, in the small ways that I've attempted to, represent to others the sort of poorly structured, faith that one puts into it, the bad idea that it is to believe or to, put any sort of, I hate to keep using the word faith, but what else can I say? That's all it's backed by, to continuously, expect that something that your faith is based on is going to create tangible, good results in one's life is, silliness. It is the type of thing where, if you believe Santa Claus will bring you the presents, maybe he'll show up eventually. And now that I'm down to my last 20 minutes or so, also I wanted to make sure that not only did I thank Mr. Corbett for coming on tonight, but of course Jim Funky, who will be hosting after the last cup, after I'm done here tonight. But I also wanted to point out that, he also does that Boiler Room radio show. And if anybody who listens to me doesn't listen to Jim, I think you need to. That's one thing. Next thing is, and also Lance is on there with him, another guy, Lance Musser, who does the whole Smoke'em's Market Minute thing, and I'm about ready to check on his videos on YouTube and stuff, which Jim pointed me to. I just haven't quite gotten the time to do it, but believe me, I'll be on that real soon and checking that out. All of the guys who are participating here at UCY, whether that be the people in the chat room, the hosts, of course, Jules, everybody that is trying to produce all this stuff for you, I really hope that you take a moment and think and, if you got a couple extra dollars, toss it to Jules, give her a little bit of help, throw her just a little bit of love so that we can make sure that this network is encouraged to continue, because I would sure as hell hate to see it disappear. You can find that button on the UCY site, and especially those of you in chat, you know where the button is. Okay? And I'm sure if you drop her anything, it would be appreciated. I have a donate button. I have stuff like that. I just haven't even put it out yet, because I'm not quite prepared to offer something of value all by myself outside of, my 2 hours on Saturday and my little drop-ins here and there. But, believe me when I tell you, I'm looking to expand this as well. I just want to make sure that I have, more, diverse ways of doing this. The Saturday show, I think I'm going to try and keep as an interview show of sorts, and I'm going to bring you a variety of guests. I've done my best to do that thus far. I've tried to bring you some very interesting, incredible people who have something to say, where they've done something, whether it be James Corbett, who has produced this amazing volume of stuff, and is somebody that if you don't know and you're somebody who's into alternative media, you need to know him, because at the very least, James will provide you with a library of things that you can begin to start doing your own critical examination of a varied array of topics. Not only that, but, he used to have the ClimateGate website, which is no longer up, but the whole thing about the global warming deal and the scientists and all that, and that's no longer around, but I think he is housing the ClimateGate stuff now at Corbett Report as well. He's turned that website into a one-stop shop for all of this stuff, which is for free. And, there's a reason for that, and you can check out tons of stuff, not only, and hey, if you run across my name on there, it's only about Lee Harvey Oswald. That's all that I directly participated in with James. But I find the idea of the open source journalism and the encouragement to get out there and add your voice in one way or another to the stream of consciousness, whether it be on the electronic level or, as James pointed out, You can also do it on just a, physical face-to-face level, sitting there and having discussions with your neighbors, with your family, with your friends, with your children. All of these things are of use when it comes to adding to the sort of collective chorus consciousness. And, of course, I have my viewpoints on that, which I've, sort of related here and there. But I really want to try to expand this into something a little more unique than just the interviews that I do on Saturdays. And hopefully I'll continue to do that on UCY. But like I said, try and keep that in mind, that if you got a couple of dollars and you find something valuable on this network, I would say that, you give a little value for some value. Okay? So keep that in mind. Also, not just Jim, who was on with me tonight, but there's other people on this network that are definitely worth listening to that are not just the replays. I enjoy Mae Russell myself, but, she has the simulcast of Jack Blood, John Stokes. She has her show in the morning, which is before the first cup. Awfully interesting. You have the Prepper Chicks, and I'm telling you, the Prepper Chicks show is pretty neat. I was really enjoying some of their episodes because it's very practical, very personal stuff you can do, and it's the kind of thing that I'm not going to cover, but it's their thing. And you see, they're taking their point of view, putting it out there, giving you real world solutions to a lot of interesting scenarios, and some of them, as many people fear and believe, are going to be necessary things. These are not just hypotheticals that are, coming your way where there may be a scenario where there's this or that or the third thing. But, a hurricane comes by and knocks out the grid. It might be nice if you're sort of prepared. So I definitely also endorse and tell you to look at the Prepper Chicks. You have the I'm going to be embarrassed now, but I can't remember her name, with the Try This at Home lady. She's interesting to listen to too. You got Truth on the Tracks, you got Double Crossed, you got all these guys, and a whole lot of them. I'm not saying I agree with everything that comes out of everybody's mouth. Believe me, I'm not. And even my friends, I don't necessarily agree with everything they say. But I'm telling you now that this is definitely becoming a valuable collective of information. And, when you jump on it every single day for free, you may want to consider that sometimes, even if it's just something, look, you'll tip a pizza guy just for bringing you pizza. So look at the information you're being brought and listen to the hosts. And, you have your friends that you interact with in the chat room, or you have other things that you gained, some sort of insights or knowledge or ability to trade, or, new websites that you learned about through us, or whatever else. If there's value here, value for value, okay? So just keep it in mind. So I'm getting a lot closer to that wrap-up time, and I definitely want to say that, I'm going to continue the Saturdays and look for me to expand it pretty soon. I just got to get a couple of things straight on my personal end, and we'll be good to go. Hopefully my ramblings are not so unlistenable, when I don't have a guest, that you guys have some appreciation for some of my, running off at the mouth now and then. But I do enjoy doing it. Either way, and whether there's one of you listening or there's a million of you listening, it really doesn't matter, because I'm going to do this my way anyhow. So, and there's the lighter I got complaints about. Don't really care. Matter of fact, every time during the intro of my show now, I seem to get the lighter kind of close to the mic and give you guys a little sound now, because somebody was bitching about that week number 1. Deal with it. Also, let's see, what else did I want to bring up here? Now I totally lost my train of thought because I was thinking about that. Well, there was some emails I got this week, I've got to tell you, that you guys might enjoy listening to about. I don't know if I have time to really cover them, but let's just say this. I find it really fascinating that there are people that lurk and listen and don't come on to make phone calls, and don't go into the chat room, and I don't know much about them, but I've given out my email address a couple of times, and I guess they heard it. Well, I'd like to get a couple of friendly emails if there's any to be had. For those little complaints that I get silly emails about, I really find it funny. So keep those coming as well. I'll take all that as well. You can get a hold of me personally at CHUCK1972 at Lycos, which is spelled LYCOS.com. That's my personal email address. I check it, every day or every other day when I can. And, so any sort of feedback, show ideas, concepts, complaints, whatever, can all go there if you like. Let's see. What else did I want to make sure I mentioned tonight? Well, I did mention that you can find me on the Corbett Report thing. You can also look at my YouTube channel, which is generally JFK focused. When we were talking about the Federal Reserve notes and the U.S. notes thing and the JFK sort of mythology about how the Federal Reserve had him wiped out over printing those bills, I'm sure that you guys hear that a lot. You can see a video I did on that on either YouTube, or if you don't like YouTube, you can try Daily Motion. I think they're under the same title. And you just look for Blind JFK, because that was what I went under, was Blind JFK Researcher for the longest time. Little tag I ended up with because of my issues with my eyesight and having to carry around a magnifying glass while reading documents and things like that. So, if you look on either Daily Motion or YouTube and you just find Blind JFK Researcher, you'll find some different videos, varying qualities and things. Some of them are, posts of radio shows I did, or phone calls where I was a phone caller, or book reviews, stuff like that. But when you see a video called JFK and the $2 bill, I sort of explain a lot of that stuff about, what the difference is between U.S. notes and silver certificates and how they pre-existed the Kennedy administration, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that subject, you can find it there. I'm really interested, excited to see what James does with his documentary. I thought it was going to be a mini documentary, actually, because he told me about it beforehand. I don't know, maybe like a week ago, something like that. And I thought he was going to have a mini documentary already prepared by the time we went to air, but it's apparently grown into a larger sort of documentary that he's going to do in 3 parts. And I think it's important that James always presents, and I try to sort of, when I can, present solutions to things, not just problems, because, we can sit and discuss what's wrong with everything all day long here on this network. I mean, we don't have enough hours in the day to literally cover every single thing that is wrong on the planet. But, to sit and also discuss the mechanisms by which one might be able to repair it, one might be able to improve it, one might be able to understand it, is of the greatest importance. And I hope that at the very least, some of the stuff that I'm doing and that I'm bringing to you gives you the, inspiration to begin to think and look for yourself. Because as I'm fond of saying, critical thought seems to be quite the dead art. And I don't find that, that there are very many people that do very much outside of parrot their own or someone else's ideas and concepts and catchphrases as a way of formulating conversations that are really not conversations at all. I mean, they might as well just be a giant billboard with some changing letters on occasion, standing on one side of the street while I stand on the other and try to flash my particular pre-programmed phrases at them. This is not thinking. This is not, debate. This is not examination in any way, shape, or form, which is one of the things I tried to do with Christine LeBlanc, who came on with me. And we also, in addition to discussing the Rethink 9/11 Canada tour, which, began on the 13th of of the month here. Which is the architects and engineers touring around Canada and doing presentations up there, about, Building 7 and the collapses of the World Trade Center, which, have not been properly investigated, that kind of stuff. When I was on the air with her, we also wound up, going into the discussion of, evaluating and collecting evidence and things like that. And I think that all of these things are rather worthwhile, because the methodology by which you gain your information is just as valuable as the honesty or the accuracy of that information as well. And, I think I'm going to stop asking for phone callers because I don't get them generally. That's another thing I wanted to say because, I don't know, I guess people don't want to really call in on my little show here. So I guess I'll stop asking for phone callers and, we'll just take it from there. I won't make it part of the show because I'm not inspiring that interaction. Hopefully, though, you guys will be able to take some of what I'm saying, some of what I'm talking about, and utilize it somehow. Whether you go look at Corbett's website or you go look at, the Rethink 9/11 stuff, or you wind up examining Richard Gage or Joan Mellon's website or her books or Jefferson Morley's work, confronting the CIA and the FOIA lawsuits or any of that stuff. Hopefully I inspire a couple of people to at least begin to look at some things, in some new ways and, don't just simply support your preconceived notions, your prejudice. I don't want to sit here and support other people's prejudices and sit there and just attaboy everybody who has a thought which seems to comport with my own. I hope that I'm inspiring at least some sort of new ways of thinking, or at least the consideration of other ideas that are, grounded and well-founded in some way, shape, or form. And, if I can do that, I'll definitely continue to do what I'm doing. But otherwise, I guess I'll have to change tactics a little bit. So like I said, I'm going to probably stop asking for phone callers anymore. But that's only because you guys don't show up. Alrighty. And I do know that a lot of the people that end up hearing me are ending up hearing me downstream a little bit. Oh, by the way, yeah, I do forget to say this. You can, not only can you get it minutes after the show is done, it automatically drops on the Ochelli Effect page as an MP3, but also a little while later, it winds up ripping straight to YouTube, and it becomes a video where you're just looking at my banner and you can hear the show. And I encourage everybody to check that out on the UCY.TV page there. But also, I have established on my SoundCloud account, which is just SoundCloud Chuck Ochelli, you can find the Ochelli Effect broadcasts that I've had on here, plus my appearances on other shows, which include Boiler Room, Against the Wall, After the Last Cup, Before the Last Cup, or after the last cup, before the first cup. Sorry, Jules. And a few other incidents. What Matters Worldwide, where I sat in for Vince, and also hosted the call for Vince a couple times. You find that stuff on there. You find some of the music I've done and all that. And there's an RSS feed there too. So if you want to subscribe to the RSS feed on the Ochelli Effect and you want to keep, some of these interviews for future reference, you can do that straight from the UCY site, or you can get some of the more expanded stuff, which ends up on my SoundCloud for now anyway. So that's another thing to bring up. And as I get ready to jump out of here and turn it over to Jim Funky, who'll be running the After the Last Cup, I also want to make sure that I thank all of you for listening, and and for any feedback that I get, I am most appreciative, because it's hard to know that what you're doing has any sort of effect unless people actively give you some sort of feedback. So whether it's positive, negative, neutral, or otherwise, I do appreciate it, because it gives me at least a sounding board to begin to change my direction and alter what it is that I'm doing. And I'm going to take your feedback into account. So by all means, you can email me or contact me on Facebook or whatever it is you want to do to get through to me. I'll be more than happy to hear you out at least. So let's just continue with that discussion as well. Anyway, that's about it. And I got to say that, again, you know, I'm really happy to do this, and I just hope that it's of some sort of value to those of you listening. And, you know, what else can be said besides that? Oh boy, oh boy. Oh, you know, I was asked a question about the noisy little punk riff that accompanies my show at the beginning and the end. Yeah, that's actually me playing guitar. It was a really sloppy one-off sort of thing recorded once a while ago. I think it was in 92. But it was just an original piece of music because Jules had asked me to have an original piece of music for my bumper, and I said, sure, I have a few. And there it is. Anyway, guys.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
But I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? You know, pistols and fondle slab of choice, I don't know that word. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they don't want you to have just reads to